So good afternoon, everyone. Today is Thursday, August 1st, and this is a meeting of the Facilities Management Committee. And we're going to talk a little bit about the memorandum of understanding, but mostly about finances and some questions that I believe are still going to be talked about going future and how we make this come together. New member Judy Langone, representing the Finance Commission. I took my official spot on it, and I'm going to do halftime with Tom so that together we make one person. How's that for now? Until we decide.
Half a vote?
Yeah.
Okay.
Does that round up?
So together we're still 8. So with that, I know Tony is extremely busy with a couple of water main breaks in town, and he was asked at an informal gathering earlier last month about working on a possible budget, and then formally we would discuss it and then talk about bringing in the new person for the schools, the business manager, to make sure that there's full understanding of the numbers and how we get there and move forward. So I'll let Tony go, and then he can.
Oh, do you have a copy? Okay. So page 1, if you want to look at it, this is sort of our budget summary sheet as we're going through the budget. And the important thing to pay attention to is down here, step 4, is the numbers right here. So we call budget reductions. Required in theory would be budget surplus, but nothing in those 2 lines. If you see nothing there like in the first sheet, that means that the budget's balanced. So we're good to go. So this is last year's actual numbers. So it says prior to change. So if you flip to page 2, up on the top it says $1 million from schools to shared. So what that would mean is this is just showing what the impact would be, how we go about budgeting if we took $1 million out of the school budget, assuming those were facilities costs, and dumped it into a shared cost. And I use rough numbers throughout this because we can have a discussion over what's a facilities cost and what's not, but the actual impact is the same whether it's $1 million or $10 million or $12 million. So you'll notice that, and this is just as an example, it create a net surplus to the school budget of $450,000 and a net decrease to the general government budget of $450,000 because you're removing an expense from the school budget, you're dumping it into a shared cost, so there's in theory more revenue available that gets split according to the 55-45 share.
Oh, but wouldn't that reduce the amount that got split because now you'd have that money would be in a shared cost?
Because the revenues are weighted more to the schools than the town, so this is a direct just money out of your budget. You'll see when we get to the next page what happens when we take it from both budgets, and it has a, it's always going to have more of a negative impact on the general government budget because the available revenues are always getting split 55-45. And we would likely be taking more expenses from the school budget because the facilities portion is just a larger amount than on the town side. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yeah, I think that's what Tom McQuaid's initial.
Yeah, and he ran some numbers again too. That it's his numbers were 2.4 million and 1.1 or something like that, whatever they were. But it's a bigger school number than it is a general government number.
I think it's much higher than that from the schools.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, whatever happens, but the impact remains the same.
Why
Whatever
don't we
those
go
numbers
through this
are.
first
But,
and
yeah.
then,
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you go to page 3, this is probably this is one of the 2 likely scenarios that we would look at. And it's funny, the 2 scenarios we looked at, and one of them is if we did this as a shared cost budget, so we basically are just moving costs from both budgets into the shared costs. And then the other scenario would be, well, what if we just created sort of a magic third place that was before anything gets split, that we would almost, take $2 million or whatever it is right off the top, that would be facilities, and then what would the impact be? We found the impact for how we budget is actually the same in both scenarios. So this case is a likely case of moving, just in terms of the percentages, if we took $1 million out of general government and we took $1.5 million out of the school budget and we treated that as a before everything else, so we would also be subtracting $2.5 million in revenue. So the total revenue picture goes down $2.5 million, but we're reducing the expense $2.5 million. That's all now above the line or below the line. The net impact, because it impacts the revenue available, is that would cause the school department to gain about $125,000 and the general government side to lose about $125,000. Because what you're doing in this scenario and in the second scenario is there's effectively more general revenue available that's according to the split. So the total number balances. If these numbers weren't balanced, we'd have a real problem. So the budget is balanced at this point. It's just according to our formula, it's going to have that net impact. That's scenario 1. So that's pretend we created almost like an enterprise fund. We disappear the revenues and the expenses from the budget. Scenario 2, which is here on page 4, same numbers. This is if we dumped it into shared costs. So the school budget goes down $1.5 million, the town budget goes down $1.5 million, but shared costs go up $2.5 million. The net impact to the budget is nil. We're still talking about, we're just moving our numbers around. It still has the same revenue impact of plus $125,000 to the school department budget and minus $125,000 to the town budget. Because again, that net revenue available is always the 55-45 formula. If we had that formula even, you'd see no impact because you'd really just be bumping numbers around on a sheet.
Right.
So either scenario, if we want to say let's take facilities completely off the top, it's a net impact of it benefits the school budget, slightly disadvantages the general government budget, and even if we did it the other way where shared costs or off the top, the impact is actually the same.
Why is the revenue number, why do they differ
Right.
between 3 and 4?
Between three, they don't actually.
It's where you put it.
Well, so we dumped that, we for this one, we're just saying if we took out the revenues, so we took the expenses out of the budget and we took the revenues out, pretending that it's above the line over here.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
yeah, okay.
So, but think of our net budget as it is. If we lost $1 million in revenue, but we lost $1 million in expenses, what happens? Nothing, it's all the same. So that's basically what we're saying is, we ripped all that out, what would happen? The bottom line's not changing. The way we shift our money would cause a change between what's available to the school department and what's available to general government.
Right.
Now, I'll show you scenario 5, which would never really happen, but let's just say, and I am sure Dave's already looking at this liking it. Let's say we took $1.5 million in expenses from the school budget and we booked it entirely as a general government expense. As predicted, the net impact is the schools have an extra $1.5 million and the town loses an extra $1.5 million because we have talked about whether, and the reason I show this is we have talked about whether or not we would make it sort of a general government cost, but we would have to move the revenues over with that. If we were to do that every year when we do our formula, you'd always have to have sort of a plug-in of plus $1.5 million on the general government side. Just as when we, so as an example, when last year with Forbes Hill, we allocated extra money to the school budget, or we didn't, but whatever. What we do, at least in the formula, is everything gets split, and then you're sort of going in and putting minus $500,000 from here, adding $500,000 from here. You'd always need to do that, otherwise you'd be you'd be absorbing that $1.5 million cut, which wouldn't make sense to do. But you'd have to do that every year. In theory, you could try to change the baseline for that year, and then going forward, it wouldn't be an issue. But we show the scenario in the event that if we did want to move it over to be a general government expense, have general government responsible for the cost growth going forward, but you'd have to move that revenue over. So every year there'd be an adjustment in the formula to make that number work. So, in a nutshell, whether we do it as sort of above the cost, and again, whatever we decide as a facilities cost, that's up to us to decide, or that we do it as a shared cost, the net impact is it's always going to add a little bit of money to the school budget and take away a little bit of money from the town budget. Never a substantial amount in either case. I use $1 million and $1.5 million. Even if you tripled that, I mean, you'd be looking at $375,000 maybe, but that would be a 1-year sort of adjustment, and then everything going forward would again still be split according to the formula. So that's, for the most part, absorbable if we wanted to go either way. And I was a little surprised it balanced out that way, but that's sort of the net impact of any big changes that we were to make. There's 2 options when it comes to budgeting. I'm a firm believer, having talked to a lot of my colleagues who've done this elsewhere, we should first share the management and the administration and worry about, to a subsequent year, to actually moving the budget numbers over. For a couple of reasons. It is possible for one person to manage multiple budgets. It's what I do, it's what Dave does. So even though we got to take ourselves back to one of the reasons we want to do this is we want to invest more in our facilities, which will save us more in the long term, but we need to be strategic. We know that a facilities department's not going to work if we don't give them some working capital to actually be able to make repairs with, so that way it's not such a big deal. And you let your facilities department, I trust that department head to be rational, that if Dave wants new furniture in his office versus the boiler's broken at the Bulge, we know what the decision is going to be made there. Furniture in Dave's office. But that way we're not looking at, my office, for instance, is a rational example, is only 7 or 8 years old. We had the fire here a few years ago. It was recently remodeled. So if I'm saying I need new furniture and I need new carpets, your facilities director is going to say, yeah, but you know what? The superintendent's office hasn't done it in 25 years. So strictly from a facility standpoint, an office is an office for the most part.
I'd say whoever gives them the thickest envelope.
Yeah, exactly. But it's also so that we can invest more in our facilities in a strategic way. The budgets, as an example, so we always say who's going to be the facilities director. So when we name Charlotte our facilities director, and let's say she has a $5,000 repair at the Balch. All she's gonna do is, here's the Balch budget, Balch electrical repairs, $5,000. That's all it is. In terms of savings, I know we'd like to look at savings across the board and be able to reinvest those in facilities, but we're still saving the taxpayers money. So if we look at that, we've got $5,000 per building budget for electrical repairs, and I'm making that number up. And let's say we sign a new contract, or we go in-house versus outsourcing for the contract, and we save $35,000. We're still saving the taxpayers money. That's still more money in the budget. Would I like to have that all in one perfect budget so we can say, great, now our working capital fund is up? Yes, but you know what? You delete according to what you think you're going to save at 10% off the electric bill. You cut that 10% from each individual budget. It's still providing everyone flexibility. Especially with the conversion to munis, trying to gum up the budgets now, I think would just be very difficult. So when Charlotte's the facilities director, again, the principal at the Balch, I don't know why I'm picking the Balch, but calls and says, hey, I think I got to get a couple classrooms painted. It's, gee, you've only got $100 in your budget, just like anything else, and then you make that decision. Well, do we look and get money somewhere else? Does it come out of sort of our working capital fund? Is it a repair that's needed, or is it a, Dave and I want a new desk and we don't really need it? You'll still make those decisions. I know there's always concerns that schools have a bottom line budget, and what happens if they're just moving money out to fund something else? Well, we know that school departments have a bottom line budget, but there's still some consistency with what you ask for is what you're still expected to generally do. So if Charlotte, as the facilities director in September, says, hey, I'm out money for electrical repairs at the Balch because the school department moved it to have a field trip, that's not what the money was remotely appropriated for. That's not what we're talking here. At the end of the year, money gets moved around for flexibility purposes, but I don't think the school department is fundamentally allocating money for repairs and then not doing it. And that comes up in our transfers, and the FinCom will be aware of that. So if miraculously it's, hey, we're budgeting $8,000 a year for electrical repairs, and every time we spend $700, we find out that the money's been going somewhere else. Well, where's it been going? We can't do this without tracking it. Did it go into plumbing repairs? Well, that's one of the same. Whether you have 5 and 5 or 10 and 2, it is what it is. We'll track those things. We'll know where they're going. So again, when it's $50,000 in repairs, and I did have a school district that occasionally did this, and they say, oh, well, no, we want to hire, another assistant superintendent. We're going to know that that's happening. I don't think town meeting would accept that. I don't think the school committee would approve that.
No.
I don't think the administration would say, let's take $6,000 from every building's repair budget to do this, unless there's a conscious decision to do it. But we also rely on our historical trends in that, and we say, well, all right, what have you been spending at the Balch for electrical repairs, or the Cleveland, or the Prescott, wherever? If you've been averaging $5,500, we know you're not going to go and say, well, just budget $1,000 because it is what it is. Because the working capital fund that we'll have is there for any increases if it's something beyond the ordinary repair schedule, but it's also supposed to be there to make improvements. So I'm not as worried about that, because that's all a controlled process where we know what transfers are being made, we know where money is being moved around. So again, if July 1st, and this doesn't happen, but Dave and the school committee say, oh, all right, take $60,000 out of the facilities budget to do A, B, and C, we're gonna know that's not what town meeting appropriated it for. Yes, they have the authority, but the statutory law isn't you have the authority to, as Dave might know, it's not that you have the authority to move money anywhere around because you get the authority to do it and you can just do whatever the heck you want. There's still a reasonable responsibleness to town meeting, the FinCom, to have a educational reason to do it, and I don't think that they're fundamentally doing that.
I think where we tend to move money around is because we have like 50 different accounts for, we have electrical repairs at the Balch and the Cleveland and like at all 9 buildings. Plus we have plumbing repairs at all 9 buildings, and those numbers don't tend to stay right in their lanes. But as a group, I think those numbers are.
Yes. So what we were able to do with Munis, and Kathy, you can correct me if I don't have it right. We did. So you did plumbing. There's a make it up $100,000, and then within it's a blanket, and then within that we did amount of money for each school,
right?
And as long as we don't go over the total,
Right.
we can move it around between
Right,
the
because
schools.
it
So
never
it gave
happens
us-
that
it
you
gives us
have
a little bit
a
more
$1,000 leak at
flexibility.
each
Right,
school.
right.
You're going to have
Exactly.
one.
You have a $5,000 leak at one,
Right.
and that's fine. And even then, we're going to know that, if we're never spending any money on plumbing repairs at the Balch, well, maybe you lower that number. Maybe we say, look, we've got a fake number in there, we don't need it. And we may spend a year or two consolidating some of these lines, because you want to track it by school so you know where you're spending your money. But it's just a shell game to say, well, how much electrical repairs does the Balch need? You're right, because you know what, it could go 5 years with nothing, or it could have $15,000 a year because something's always popping or breaking. We don't do water repair money by street or anything like that, because right now I probably got a $50,000 fix on Washington Street that maybe we haven't had one in 20 years. So I'm not worried about that
That
portion.
vendor
We
better be
can-
paying that bill.
Yeah, well, I don't want to say anything, but it was a contractor that snipped a line, so that's what's going to end up paying it. But
I'm definitely in favor of the idea of not moving the money right now. I feel like there's a lot. I understand what Tony's saying about this being the plan and how it's absolutely true, and I never doubted it, that if we took all the money that was budgeted for this type of money from the schools and all that was budgeted from the town and then reallocated, it was going to come out fine and we could make it all basically be neutral. But my questions are, and I sent you guys an email, but I sent it less than an hour ago, and I didn't realize you were on this committee now, Judy, so I printed copies. My question is, there's different ways that we could set this up, and the question is if it's a shared expense, and who's going to have control over how big this budget is, and when we decide that we're going to put some money, operating money, into the capital items, and if that money grows, how does that impact the other budgets? And if it's a shared expense, then that gets subtracted from the other budgets. Or this could be kind of below the split, and it could become 3 categories. So instead of it being 55-45 or 57-43, which is kind of closer to where we are after the override, or it becomes 50-10-40 or something like that. And so, but then the question is, okay, so the first year you can make it come out perfectly, but then the question is, what happens if you increase the amount that you're allocating for capital? What happens if utility costs go up significantly?
Let's take one at a
What
time.
happens? No, I just want to go through, because we're not going to be able to answer any of these questions now. I just want to read through what these are the kinds of things that I would want to know answers to before we started moving money around. And so I think we could start moving management around, and then, what happens if the economy tanks and state aid goes down and excise taxes go down and the whole budget shrinks, and how does that impact it? And what happens if we are able to achieve energy efficiencies and things look good, and how does that impact everybody? And what happens if we have a bad snow year? Is it any different than what it is now? And I just would want to understand all those parameters. Whenever you're making because this in some ways is like a new contract about how we would do things. Mm-hmm. The first step is to figure out how it's all going to work when everything's going really well, and I think we're kind of on board for that. But then the question is the scenarios of what happens when things start to get wacky. Let's just figure that out and think about it. So
I think I think you're right, and I think it's worth keeping that in mind. I don't know if we need to necessarily, and we should get those answers. We don't necessarily need to start that to move down this path, because you could have a scenario down the road where the only shared costs are sort of whatever the management or the administration is, and the only, and maybe that working capital fund. And in that way, at least for a period of time, if the school committee, for instance, is concerned, well, we want to add things and we want to cut things, well, you still retain control over that budget.
Right, so as long as we have control over the budget, we don't need these answers. But before we move any budget money,
correct,
I would want to have
absolutely
some answers to these kinds of questions.
I think the way that would work operationally, so let's say you kept it that way, well, you're going to have a facilities director, and yes, the facilities director reports to the town manager, but you still have a FinCom in town meeting. So if the school committee says, well, it's a tough budget, so we're cutting all of our repair lines down to $200, that's not going to work.
Right.
The FinCom would say, no, we're going to reject this budget, and we urge the town to, the town meeting to reject it too, because we know that that's not rational. But so I guess that's why I'm not that worried about that. Now, if the school committee does say, look, we want to go to 1 custodian per building or 3 custodians per building, man, it's your budget, but nobody's going to hold the facilities department responsible if that level of care or concern isn't there.
Right.
With the working capital fund, I'm willing to, I always tell people, what's the most important facility need? I think that we'll take that recommendation from the facilities director, and again, as much as I want new carpet for my office, is the roof leaking at the Balch, and what are we fixing? I think as they go through with those things, you'll see that, again, probably 3/4 of it's going to get allocated to the schools anyway, because that's just, if you look at our facility portfolio, we have more buildings and they're bigger buildings. I don't think we need to split that according to a split and say, oh, well, gee,
No.
all right, we're doing $250,000 and wow, we can't spend $20,000 at the rec. It'll be based on what the needs are. And I think they'll have a list of projects they'd like to get done, but some of those won't get done till towards the end of the year, because they're going to need that working capital throughout the year. Because what you want them to be able to do is when you have a repair to decide, okay, a panel popped at the Balch, it's a $4,000 repair. You know what? It's time to spend $40,000 and fix this electrical problem we've had. I mean, the Balch does not have electrical problems. I just keep picking on them, so I don't want anyone to think that there are. But you know what? We need to spend $40,000 to fix this because we're tired of constantly dumping money into the same problem. That sounds perfectly rational to me.
Yeah.
If the school committee would feel more comfortable, we can bring some of those decisions to this board, this committee here, just as sort of a vetting process for that first year or two until everyone feels comfortable, and then we'll say, okay, really they're doing some boring stuff that facility people do, like, there's this repair that's going to get done, or this repair that's going to, we all want the nice stuff. We want new furniture and new carpets and new air conditioning systems, and really it's going to be something that you don't see, behind the scenes that ends up getting fixed. But I think we should maybe come up with how these questions would be answered, but also let's wait on doing the budget part, share the management and the administration, and there can be a discussion about how big we want to do, but I think this committee can come to a decision, okay, we know we've talked about having a director, an assistant director, an office manager, and as situations develop, is there an efficiency? Is there a chance to reduce contracts and hire an HVAC person? I think you just look at the numbers and have a meeting. I don't know if we could come up with what the formal process would be, but if I could say, hey, I'm spending $200,000 on water fountain repairs, to make something up, and I can hire somebody who can get more hours for $130,000, and here's the impact of both budgets. I'm going to shave $28,000 out of your budget and $10,000 out of my budget. Does everyone think this is a good idea? Yeah, let's go with it.
Yeah. I mean, I actually looking, we're talking like, a planned marriage or engagement, and I really think we need to take a step back and just start dating first, to use the scenario.
I agree with you. I think that's why sharing the management first is we are
right. So let's just share the management, not, if there's new positions.
Dave, we need to combine checking accounts.
Right. We don't need to combine checking accounts in the first year. Sometimes it takes 5, maybe sometimes it takes 50. But that piece can come later. But the first piece, and for me, with a new business manager coming on who has actually gone through this process and see the pitfalls, I would like to see her. And she's not going to be able to come the end of August and do that because there's a whole bunch of stuff to catch up on before that can happen. But we talked about adding some positions, but leave the majority of the salaries where they are, except for those new positions, and let's just start with the first date. We don't need to get engaged. We don't need to plan the wedding.
Agree. I think that
and then come back and start looking at these financial pieces as we start living it.
right. I think we should take the opportunity now that we're engaged with Munis and still trying to get over some issues. Let's not complicate the matter.
Right.
If we're going to do anything with the budget, it's for FY21, which is a long way off at all. But we can certainly, let's start with the sort of the management piece, get people comfortable with how things are working, that the budgets track the way they track today, and let's just work cooperatively to see how it goes. I think we all know what the intended finalization is what we want, but we want to make sure we all feel comfortable as we're walking down the road. We don't want to complicate it by dealing with real major budget issues at the same time that you're trying to deal with management issues, right?
Right.
So let's leave the budget issues till after Munis is more under everyone's belt and they feel a little bit more comfortable dealing with it on a day-to-day basis. But let's try the management issue. I think it's a good step forward. Tom and Judy, anything that observations, everything?
No, you have to walk before you run.
Right.
And
So if you want to use this committee as sort of this is what we're doing, I mean, that is the nature of what the committee was for, was to really look at the whole combined operation. So I don't think you're going to get any pushback on that. So
Right.
I
And actually, we by starting to date, we would actually you would have that facilities person overseeing facilities, so that first primary piece that you're looking for is still going to start without convoluting all the other pieces.
Right.
And we don't really, we don't have
just
the
may
data
need
yet.
to. I
Right.
mean, Paul is the designated person on both
I
sides.
thought it was
so-
Charlotte.
The issue of hiring additional still needs to be addressed because there's no way that Paul can.
Yeah, we can't
Deal with-
start this without a couple of more people.
Right. I
Right.
mean, there's just no way. I mean, I know you're set up pretty well on the school side as far as how it works, but on the general government side, where we have department heads doing it, which is a major reason why we want to
Right.
Yeah.
sort of model after what you guys have done. But that's going to take 1 or 2 more people. So there's just no way it can be done under the present head count. I mean, there's only 2
Right.
management people on your side.
Right.
You can't double their
No.
space and say, okay, yeah, you got it. We'd be stepping.
No, I
mean,
agree.
Even Joe
Or-
McDonough from the very
Right.
beginning said they failed because they didn't address the management issue first.
Right.
They tried to do the budget first and they failed. And I think we need to learn from that, from that experience, and say, okay, let's deal with that.
And I know Maynard, for instance, they were when they did it, it was they first shared the people, then it was a year or 2 later, and they didn't go through a budget transition as we have, but that's when you change the budget. Because again, I manage, 22 different budgets, 30 different budgets. Dave does too. So it's not that complicated to just do that. You have a budget for an area. That's not a, that's the more complicated thing. You could have a situation in the future where you still have a majority of these costs booked separately to different areas, and then what would just grow in efficiency would be that shared budget, if you will, for the facilities portion. But that'll never, other than that working capital, that'll never be that big. It's not gonna be a $9 million expense down the road. It's gonna be a handful of people, and maybe it grows little by little because maybe we say, all right, you know what? You guys have a plumbing contract, I have a plumbing contract. This year it makes sense to go to an in-house plumber versus contract now, or vice versa, whatever happens to be. You see what the impact
And
is.
Paul and I have done that analysis, so we know where the potential savings are on either contractor expense or personnel expense. So I think you're ahead on that
Right.
piece of it. It's
What I'm
not
saying
like
is,
we're starting from being new, so
as
that's
those
good.
things happen, that's fairly easy to say time and time, because again, we may have people in positions where we say, oh, look, we got a person doing this work, we're not just gonna axe them for no good reason. Maybe somebody leaves and we say, well, now's the time to go to a contract, and here's how it would work, and the numbers will show whether we do anything makes sense. I mean, if we have an HVAC tech that we're paying $100,000 a year and we can get a contract to do it for 10, who's gonna say no to that? You know what I mean? We'd all
So
say
in other words,
absolutely.
we're talking about what's being born here is the Central Facilities Department.
Yes.
It's a third department. Eventually, there'll be 3 budgets: schools, town, and facilities, correct?
Not necessarily. I think
No?
that's we could do it that way. It could just end up being a shared cost. If you're
I'm
talking
talking
about
more
moving,
of a shared cost. You were talking enterprise fund, but a separate and distinct department.
we
with their
could do
own
it that
budget.
way if we want to. What I'm saying is
Yeah.
we don't necessarily have to. Now, when we talk about a shared cost, we have our current shared cost budget, which to my point is really sort of a fixed cost budget.
Yeah, we
It's
need to
things
change the
don't have
terminology.
control
Even
of.
the state is saying, stop calling it shared. We went through this in June, and they said, you can't call it shared, you need to call it fixed, because shared, in their terminology, refers to other things with regards from
Right,
town to
but
town, and so
If
we
we
need
were,
to
I don't know
try
if we
to.
would necessarily be successful because it would be so large, putting every single facilities cost in the current shared budget. So you're right, it may become a third budget, if you will. Whether you call it a shared cost or whether it's general government schools and facilities or general government schools and shared, we could get there. We don't need to get there today to make the model work and get the benefit of the model, which is a better way to reinvest and invest more in our facilities. That's what we want to do.
And the management piece out of the chute by, going towards the centralized facility would be that transferred, like you would be transferred to something?
Well,
Or we're
right now,
just
they would
talking
still
about-
stay
Right, it
within
would
the
stay.
budget.
Stay within
yeah.
the organization as it
David
is
and
today, just
Tony
start
would be
acting
working to-
like
Right,
it
so
is
he
like-
would, so using the facilities manager would probably get paid out of 2 budget lines.
Fine.
And how about the new people that we have to hire? You said 2.
So, from my perspective, when Dave and I put this together, we did it, I think, very modestly. So we had a facilities director, an assistant director, who would also still work with us, do some work. Maureen, who's there now, works for me, and an assistant to Maureen, because she'd be taking on even more work. And then we looked at a plumber and an electrician. And when Dave and I went through this, we're all spending enough money, electrical, to have an in-house electrician, and we're all spending enough money on plumbing to have an in-house plumber. And the beauty of that is they become part of the team. The plumber might not be doing plumbing work all the time, but he can help out doing other
But
things.
these would be
Whereas-
benefit people.
Right, whereas with a contract, you don't get that benefit.
Right.
You know?
And we're doing an analysis now on how many hours we billed out for plumbing and electrical last year and what the cost is, because I think, what was our electrical cost last year for contracted services?
Electrical was about 100,000.
Yeah, so,
So plumbing was a lot more than that. Plumbing
So-
was around 140 or more, I believe,
Right.
when we looked at it.
And then, Kathy, on the electrical, the whole alarm piece, did you count the alarm piece?
no, because there's the alarm piece, there's also the wiring piece.
So your
IT will tell you
electrician
that-
can do that stuff.
Right, there's the cable wiring, all of that.
All of that, and then your motion alarms, burglar, all of that stuff, your card swipes, that can all be done in-house. So there's even more money that we're all spending that we could bring in-house.
Yeah, I mean,
At a savings.
IT alone spends thousands of dollars a year every time we gotta rewire something.
Right.
And for whatever reason, electricians don't like to come in and just rewire. You're hiring somebody to do it specially, and it costs a fortune. I mean, so
Yeah, right.
there's other savings in there. that we could see. And some of them, I could almost hire an electrician just for town buildings, but when you combine between the town and school buildings, you start seeing, not only is it, even if it's at the same cost, it's how many hours did you bill out. So if an employee works 2,000 hours in a year, subtract some vacation, so they're working 1,800 hours in a year, but we're currently spending $120,000 to get 900 hours of electrical work. Well, what's that showing is that, hey, you know what? I want that other 900 hours of work.
I just think we need to carefully show those numbers so that when
Sure.
people start asking, oh yeah, see, you're formed and now you're increasing your
Yeah.
headcount, I think we need to carefully explain
Right.
Right.
that
Right.
it's a savings. You can take out whatever part you want. You're either gonna spend it on a contractor or spend it on an employee. And the
Right.
advantage of how we're doing it now with employees, we're counting those benefit costs, we're capturing them so that it's the bottom line, and I think we'll see those savings for the town.
Yeah,
So-
the
and we have to
build
show it.
hours is gonna be a good description. That's something that, Paul, if you could work on too,
Yeah.
just how many hours are we billing out? Because again, you start looking at not just, well, I'm spending 130 grand on plumbing repairs. If I pay a guy 80 grand a year plus benefits, it's about the same. Well, how many hours are you getting for one versus the
Right,
other? Because
exactly.
that's where you start saying,
Yeah.
oh, you know what? I'm paying for 1,500 hours and I could get 1,800 hours. And
Right.
6 weeks more of plumbing work a year,
Right. And
But
that
6
is-
weeks more of other work, it
Right.
doesn't necessarily have to
And
be
that's
plumbing.
and that is your first efficiency. Is you're not necessarily saving money efficiently, but
Cost
you're
avoidance.
getting more work. You're getting preventative work
Right.
from that situation.
More productivity from your dollar.
Mhm.
Right,
Right.
And so just as an example, so that's 6 weeks, you might have a project that you say, gee, the bathroom here in Town Hall really needs some work. We're not gonna do a major renovation, absent doing major renovation, but you know what? 3 or 4 tradesmen with 2 or 3 weeks worth of work, I could spend $5,000, and otherwise I'd be paying a contractor God knows what, and going out to bid, and all the other issues and challenges that we have.
Yep.
So, if we want to go forward with a management change, not shifting any of the major budgets at this point, what's the minimum that we have to do? What has to happen?
You need to vote that, and so does the board of selectmen.
Well, no, you're talking about what's the minimum that it needs to look like?
No, I
Well,
think
I mean,
she's-
we've talked about we need to hire at least 2 new people, right? And is there a budget to do that somewhere? And is there money that needs to be moved? And like what?
Well, we talked about tentatively doing this as of January 1st. We could do
Right.
it as of July 1st to make sure that it's easier to move money around as of July 1st.
Next July?
Yeah, I don't want
1st?
to keep kicking things off, but the other hand is I'd rather do it right than move money in the middle of the year. We're going to have an early special, likely this year.
What
in
does
the,
that
in
mean?
the fall, sorry, an early special town meeting in the
No,
fall.
I know, but like specifically
Like
when you
late
thinking?
September, early October. We have a couple of things that need to happen generally a little bit earlier. We can always do a second one, but I don't want to.
If it's going to be late September, then the schools, we are meeting next week, school committee's meeting next week, but then we're not meeting again until early September. So if we wanted to put anything on the warrant, we would need to do it next week.
Why are we thinking September?
We have a couple of things that are generally time sensitive,
Like what?
to be determined.
Hope we can make it in October, because I'm not here in
What's
September.
that?
Hope you can make it in October.
First week in
'cause
October.
Okay, that's fine.
Right.
But even if it's the first week in October, then the
Yeah,
school
we
committee
need
would
to-
need to
right.
know that
Right.
next week.
Because we have that
When did-
that
When
feasibility.
would we have to?
Yeah, we've
We
already
gotta
got that programmed
Six-
into the
six
tentative
months
warrant
out?
that we know we've got to do the middle school
That's the middle of
borrowing.
August.
Why are we talking
Okay,
about
but the
October?
school committee would have to vote on that beforehand,
Okay.
and that's got to be what 45 days out.
Or at least 35.
About.
Okay.
So. just-
All right, so, couple things. One is, right, if we're going to authorize Dave and Tony to move forward on hiring, where is that money coming from? Number 2 is we do need affirmative vote from both boards.
But if
to
we're talking
agree
about
to this-
next July 1, then.
Well, even to the concept of management, I just think we need a vote that says this, we're authorizing this, because without that, it becomes a little,
So I have a suggestion, and I never like to start a suggestion off with let's meet again in a month. But let's meet again in a month. In between now and then, what I'd like to do is we will get whether Dave wants to work on it, or we can make Tom McQuaid work on it, or I'll delegate it to somebody because I don't want to do it. We'll get answers to my questions here. What can also happen is Dave and I can meet and get you a recommendation of a date to start, what it's going to look like when it starts, because we don't know, we know we need to enhance the staff capacity that we have. We may not need to do it all right away, and whether that's within a 6-month period. I mean, we're not talking about saying, well, Paul, just start doing a whole lot more. We're not going to give you anything, but maybe we talk about, you know, you want to phase these things in so it's effective. For Charlotte, I should say.
From my perspective, starting this next July would be great, because that would give us a lot of time to meet with the different department building managers on the town site and really get to know what are the issues that they're dealing with, their priorities.
What we would need in that case, though, is to David's point, we would probably need a go live before the end of the calendar year. And
Yeah.
by go live, I mean, yes, we're doing this, because we can't be here in May of next year saying,
Right.
all right, are we going to do this
Right.
as of July? Town
No.
meeting's in
Right.
2 weeks, and
Right.
you know,
Right.
let's move it.
Right.
So we would need by the end of the calendar year a definitive, this is happening and here's how it's happening. And then we have that time to make it happen before it actually happens. But between now and in next
Yeah.
month, meeting next month, we can get answers to these questions. Let Dave and I sit down, and we'll sit down with Paul and just figure out operationally. We got to probably sit down with Tom McQuaid and play the game of the budget. What are we moving around? What are things going to look like? And here's what we want to start with. Because what's going to happen is one day, all of a sudden, Dave's going to sort of lose being able to call Power right away, because Paul's going to say, oh, well, Dave, you know, I can't be right there. I've got to be at the Civic. And
I do that to him now anyway.
so good. So
He
he's
tells
already,
you
he's
where he's
already ready to
gonna
go.
be
But
when.
let him and I
Right.
just have a conversation of
Yeah.
exactly what that teased out
This
process
will be
is.
great for you. You tell him one thing, you tell him the other.
It's
like playing their parents against each other.
I spend a lot of time in it. So
Right, right. If dad says no, go ask mom. It's simple, right?
Sorry,
Yeah,
Dave,
yeah.
we gotta go down to Tony's office.
You know,
He's
you know
driving me
what's
crazy.
important about this street?
And he's going to get Murphs the whole time.
Starting in July is you and Dave can start getting on Norwood Access to talk about this once the vote is started, before even town meeting in the spring. And you can talk about the positions that we're adding, but here is where the money's coming from. That it's, yes, it's bodies, but it's not new money.
Right.
And it's,
Right.
so you
And
can
you're actually
really
getting
kind of
more bang for your
educate
buck.
before town meeting even happens.
Yeah, the extra time will let us actually dig into the plumbing and electrical budgets and
Right.
be prepared to make those allocation
Right.
changes.
Okay.
But
And the effective date of the management change will be January 1st?
no, I think we're still
No,
talking July
July
1st.
1st.
We need by January 1st, and this is where we've sort of stumbled along, we need a definitive yes or no by then, or we
Right.
can't put it together. We can't just
Right.
decide, you know, December
So
15th.
between now and next July 1st, everybody works together.
Everything will be done except what Dave and I have to do by January. I mean, there may be decisions we make down the road about consolidating budgets, how much we want for that working capital fund, but the work of us in terms of getting a recommendation of various boards saying we want to do this, and then everyone saying, yes, do it, really has to be done before the end of the calendar year, or we're just going to be spinning our wheels, and then it's budget season, and then it's just, we need a definitive yes by the end of the calendar year to make it happen. Realistically, if we wanted it to happen for January 1st, we should have said yes before the end of the fiscal year. We were a little
No,
occupied
I'm
at the end
talking
of
about
last
the
year.
management change as of January 1st.
I
and then-
I wouldn't make it as of January 1st. I'd kick that on to as of July 1st, because we'd originally talked about we would move some money around to make that happen. But I can also tell you, we talked about as of January 1st, possibly having one or two of those positions available. It's August. The likelihood that in that 4 or 5 month time period, I know it's ridiculous, but we can get job descriptions created, we can get positions posted, we can interview people. We got to make sure we move money at town meeting. Well, where's the money coming from at town meeting? We're already a couple months into the fiscal year.
Right.
I don't want to keep kicking this can down the road. I just want to make sure if we're going to do it, we
Right.
need to do it right. So that management change was predicated on we were going to bring one or two people on. Doing that without money currently allocated now is, I think we'd be rushing it. I don't want to rush it. I don't see the benefit of rushing it.
So then we're talking about, we started management change July 1, 2020, and then the budgets could potentially start shifting a year after that.
Correct. The
A
only
little
thing-
bit of budget money would move so that we could pay for the extra positions and stuff like that,
Correct,
but
and the working capital fund, which we do have money in the budget for. And then maybe we would, just as we do it anyway, if we think, hey, in 2 months we realize we can hire a plumber as opposed to our electrical contracts, those changes would go there, and maybe that's how we would start with that shared cost budget, because starting off, it's gonna be relatively small. It's gonna be a handful of positions, and then it's gonna be that working capital budget. That is okay to just do, in my opinion, that's okay to just do in shared costs, because it's not enormous, and even if that working capital fund grows, it's a singular line. If we are talking about, well, we want 57 different 100 maintenance lines going into the shared cost budget, then we probably would need to create something completely different, because then our shared cost budget becomes, $12 million in fixed costs and benefits plus $8 million in facilities. We would probably separate it at that point, but that's moving all the staff, all the custodial staff and everything over. That doesn't necessarily need to happen either A, ever, or B, for a couple of years. That I think starting it off as a shared cost budget is fine, because it's not an enormous amount of money.
So it's a step at a time.
Yes.
We're dating.
So the actual consolidation with its own budget would be at least 3 or 4 years down the line.
I would think so, because that's not where we're gonna see the efficiency. We're not doing this, in a perfect world, I'd like less pages to the budget, believe me. But that's also not where we see the efficiency. Again, there is a model out there where we do something that's more efficient, and maybe it's $1,000 from 15 different budgets, but at the end of the day, if it's $1,000 from 15 different budgets, or $15,000 from one budget, we've still saved the taxpayer $15,000. I know we all like to see the big numbers and feel good about the big numbers, but a lot of little numbers that equal up, it's the same
And I know
savings.
that the question's been asked, and I think it's been answered, is there any effect relative to our state money, Chapter 70 and all that, coming in? Because technically, in the long run, it won't be part of the school budget.
No, I've never heard of that concern before. I've talked to a half a dozen other towns. It's never been an issue. You also have to remember that how we budget our expenses is actually our own sort of internal decision. If it's a school expense, it gets reported to the state as a school expense or as a general government expense. So how we sort of organize things internally, to be honest with you, the way we handle a lot of our revenues and everything is our own way of doing it.
I think from our point of view, I mean, we've been saying for a while that we need a written agreement with the town that says, like, what they are reporting as school expenses. So the things like the shared expenses from the treasurer's, well, they're like some money that's spent for the treasurer's office, some money that's spent for the accounting office that gets counted as money that's spent towards the schools, even though it's in their budget. We should have a written agreement on that, and if we're doing this facilities department, then we would need to consider how that would
We're talking about
also,
cost delegation.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
chargeback.
yeah,
You
like
know,
charge
have
back.
a service agreement, which is a contract, and a
Right.
chargeback to,
Right.
no.
Right,
And-
so that when we do our reporting to the state at the end of the year and we say, well, how much money did you spend, that
make it a
needs to
little
all be
easier.
figured
Right.
out. And so if we do this, we just need to make sure that that's included in that agreement.
And that is the only thing that has shown up as a flag in our audits for the last 8
Right.
years. And it's been a recommendation from our auditors for a long time, and we do need to address that as well, so.
That's
Well, I would think
that's a good point.
intuitively you would want to show most of those as town expenses, so you can show the state that you're not getting a lot of money from the town, you get more in chapter
Well, well, yes, but there's pros and cons to that, because you don't get as much, so. Yeah.
So, for next month's meeting, Dave and I have some work to do. Who wants to take on getting answers to Mayev's questions, at least as a draft, so that we all understand them? I nominate David Ajar.
I'll be glad to work on a draft with Tom and come back to everybody and see,
Okay.
okay.
It seems like the answers to most of these questions will be whatever we determine they ought to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
There
In
is
some
no,
instances,
there is
yeah.
no right or wrong to some of these, it's how do we want to do it?
Well, it's just, you can choose a couple of different ways to set this up, but then to figure out which way is the best way to set it up, you need to kind of test it with some different scenarios. And some of the scenarios are like, okay, if utility costs go up by 7%, what does that look like to the school budget if everything stays exactly as it is now? What does it look like if we go with option A? What does it look like if we go with option B in terms of just how we configure the budgets? And then we would just make an informed decision about is option A or option B better for everyone and more reasonable once we kind of test it with these different scenarios.
And then Dave and I will meet to figure out what we would need for a July 1st start date and what we'd want that to look at. And then he and I can sit with Tom McQuaid and just have an idea about what's coming from where in the budget.
What are you thinking of for a September meeting date?
Dave, when's the first day of school? Because that's probably a really good day for us to meet.
Thursday the 5th.
It's the first day with students, yep.
So Thursday the 5th. Today's a Thursday. Can you do the 12th?
All right, so I am going, just so you know, I am going from the 8th on.
Well, then Tom can do your half that day.
Okay. Half is better than none.
Yeah.
For how long?
2 weeks.
In September, we're talking about?
Yeah, okay.
Unless you want to try
So-
to do the 29th of August, which is 4 weeks.
I won't be here myself, but
What about the 26th?
Of
Of
September.
Yeah.
26th of September?
September.
Just wanna make sure we have enough time before the end of the year to get everything lined up, but I think we'll be okay. I mean, you feel pretty good about Maya with your board with the slow transition and
I mean, I
understanding-
think that
know
that
the
will
absence
be
of the answers, but
right. I think everyone would be more comfortable with slower because it, as we talked about last time, one of the things is we really need to get some feedback from our new business manager,
Yep.
and so
well, this will allow some time. So
But also, there are other towns that have done this consolidation.
Absolutely.
And I know we've been talking to McDonough and so forth and all
Mhm.
that, and how they handle it, and so it's not like we're on the edge of
no.
whatever.
No. So, but I do know that Teresa had hoped to be able to come to the meeting, but I think if we, I don't know what her schedule is, but I would think that having more notice, like if we decided now to meet September 26th, it's more likely that she'd be able to clear her calendar to attend.
is everyone okay with the 26th?
Mm-hmm.
Good.
What time?
5. Does that work?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So,
Wait, so we're waiting till Thursday to September 26th?
Yep.
but I'll probably be in touch with all of you regarding the questions because I don't think we have to wait for a formal meeting. I think it's important that people
Right, but
understand the
we've
direction of some of
got,
these answers.
We get training the weekend before, so.
On the 19th, you're saying?
19th
Oh, yeah, that's right. I
and 20th.
canceled something. I think the 19th we're probably fine, but we'll probably be rushing to get the reading done on the 19th that we probably need to get done for the 26th.
Yes, we need to talk about your next great idea, by the way.
You guys are teachers. You'll have to read.
Uh-huh, yeah.
Okay, so Thursday, the 26th at 5 p.m.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. I have to run to
Thank you.
all we need.
Appreciate it. This is good.
All right. Motion to adjourn.
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Very good.